Hey guys, today we are going to change the way that you're running combat in D&D. Are you tired of chewing through 40 minutes, an hour of game time, and realizing you've only gone through 3 or 4 rounds of combat? Yeah, I was too, and that's what we're fixing in this video. I'm going to give you something today that is going to change the way you run combat in D&D. It's going to speed it up, it's going to allow for a freer flowing narrative structure to the fight, and it's going to generally make things more enjoyable for you and your players. A very large portion of the reason why combat takes so long is because we've broken it down into such small pieces. When we do overland travel, we do things in broad strokes. We montage until they get to the next place. Where we could do a day-to-day overland travel. We could do hour-to-hour overland travel. Why don't we? It's because we don't want to break it down so far that it slows gameplay. When you do an hour-by-hour approach, this might work in some games or in some portions of the game that you're running because you want to demonstrate something about the environment, about the terrain, etc. However, it does not work most of the time because you're breaking it down into such small pieces that the gameplay is slowed, it begins to lag. That's why most of the time we do either day-to-day or we just broad strokes montage it until they get to the next place. So why do we then take combat and break it down into such small pieces? It gives us more time to think, yes, but it slows down gameplay to a point that it lags most times that combats are run. Are there people that are really great at keeping combat moving? Yes. Most tables I've seen, combat takes forever. It lags and it becomes unfun by the end of the combat. So, today, I'd like to propose something called zoned combat. Essentially, all this means is that instead of breaking things down into very small 1-inch squares that represent 5 square feet in game, we're breaking things down into 3 large zones. Bigger pieces equal quicker gameplay. But before we do get into a whole bunch of specifics on exactly how this works, I just want to remind you guys, if you like my channel, if you like my content, or if you just like me, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and maybe drop me a comment to help the algorithm. That way I can keep making content just like this for you guys. Thanks so much. I love y'all. Right into it. Let's just go ahead and take this map here I made on Midjourney for the purposes of this video. So let's say that, and the river kind of divides it up very nicely. Let's say that right here is, we'll call this zone the crag, since there's that kind of rock there. Then here in the middle, we've got the river, or you could call it, the delta, whatever, this area between where the two tributaries kind of come down. And then over here you've got the beginnings of a forest. You call it the forest, you call it the tree line. For the purpose of this, we've got the crag, the river, and the forest. So the first obvious thing that we've got to worry about is movement. If movement is no longer broken down into 5-foot squares, what does that 30-foot movement really mean at all? Well, not too much. Basically, in zoned combat, you can move from one zone to the adjacent zone using your movement. You can also move anywhere in your own zone with your movement. So if I want to move anywhere, if I'm in the crag, I can move anywhere in the crag with my movement. I can also move from the crag to the river with my movement. If I wanted to move from the crag across the river and into the forest, that would be a dash action, since it would be doubling my movement. This does kind of cut through that. Well, I move 5 feet that direction, then 10 feet that direction, and then I want to move diagonally that many feet, but how does diagonal work again? It cuts through that, but it still allows for you to say, okay, well, I weave in between these trees, or I duck behind this rock and work my way around it. allowing for a very free-flowing narrative there. So you can kind of begin to see how that aspect of it starts to function. Next, because you can move anywhere in your own zone, for instance, again, if I'm in the crag, then I can move anywhere within the zone of the crag with my movement. Because of that, I can also make a melee attack against basically anyone within that zone. So if I'm in the crag and I have a monster that would, that's several feet away, but still within my zone, I can use my movement to get over there and attack that monster with a melee attack. That said, I can also use a ranged attack within my zone. However, I would need to back away quite a bit, which may provoke opportunity attacks. Otherwise, ranged characters are typically best suited in the adjacent zone. So, if the monster is at the crag, a melee character would want to dash to the crag, whereas a ranged character might want to stay near the river so that they can sort of pick at the monster with their thrown daggers or their bow, crossbow, etc. Spell attacks can become a little tricky though, since they have varying ranges anywhere from range of touch to 15 to 30 to 60 to 90 to 500 feet. So, in order to make that just pretty simple, anything with a range of 30 feet can be cast from adjacent zones. For instance, from the river to the crag. Anything with a range of 60 feet can be cast from the farther zone, from the forest to the crag. Anything with a range over that, 90, 120, 150, etc., can be cast from anywhere on the battlefield. So you could cast a flaming sphere from the river to the crag, or from anywhere in the crag, so long as you're not directly in melee range with someone. You can cast a firebolt from the forest to the crag, and you can cast Hold Monster really from anywhere. You don't even technically have to be within the bounds of the map. You can be far enough away so long as you still have line of sight or whatever exactly the specs on that spell are. So long as you have those, you don't even have to be within the realms of the battle map. That said, we must remember that these zones are not 30-foot zones. Just break out of that method of thinking, of splitting things up into a certain number of feet. A zone is a zone. Am I basically, to make it simpler, ruling the 30-foot, 60-foot, 90 feet being those kind of? Yes, but that does not mean that every zone will be 30 feet. And the space between two zones, 60 feet. Spatially, the number of feet no longer matters because your movement gets you from one to the next. And your spells can be fired from one to the next or across two zones, etc. However that works out for your specific zones. Not a measure of feet, a measure of zone. Just to keep that on the table. And finally, when in doubt, give players the benefit of the doubt. Unless they said they attacked the monster or got in melee range with the monster, don't give that monster an opportunity attack against them. If they have to move from one zone to the next and pass by one or two monsters, don't automatically take the opportunity attacks. Ask them, hey, you move by these two. Did you want to take some space to avoid them? Well, probably they did. So don't just automatically take those, because this is somewhere between the grid map and theater of the mind. So there could be some confusion that arises. Give the players the benefit of the doubt. If they cast an area of effect spell, and we'll get more on this later, don't worry about it, give them benefit of the doubt. So maybe they don't hit their comrades who were in the fray. They can probably position it in a way that they only hit the bad guys, etc., etc., etc. just give players benefit of the doubt, and you will see this work much better than if you just try to take every advantage against them. So those are the basics, guys. Those are the basics of zoned combat. You may be wondering why you would use this, why you would change the way that you play to do this, and we'll discuss a little bit more about that. And you may already be thinking of some problems, some areas of concern that you might come across when you're playing. We will also be discussing some of those. And if you think of any that I don't discuss, let me know in the comments, and I'll maybe consider that for future videos. But before we jump into all that, I do have something pretty exciting I'd like to discuss with you guys. I play a lot of games, so I know a lot of gamers, but asking around, I've been shocked and a little disappointed that you guys don't know about Dubby yet. Dubby is a new energy drink specifically tailored to gamers, with flavors like Dragonade, Dub Sludge, Galaxy Grenade, which is my favorite, and so many more. Please go check them out. There's a link to their store in the description of this video. Use the code CreatorBard at checkout for 10% off any order. Enjoy some energy, enjoy your drink, and enjoy the rest of this video. So let's get right into why use zoned combat. I've personally got two major reasons why I use zoned combat, and I'll just tell them right here. One, it allows for a free flow narrative in combat. I hate when combat becomes just, I hit him with my axe. Okay, roll your damage. I hit him with a firebolt. Okay, roll your damage. Okay, he hits you with his rapier. Okay, I'm rolling damage. It gets so boring and monotonous. When you remove some of what bogs you down, you get this much more flavorful, much more story-driven combat. And I have seen it occur. It's not just something that, like, well, if you just had more imagination, you could do that with grid combat. There's too much going on in grid combat for you to express adequately what you want to in a narrative fashion. It's just, I've seen it happen in my games where I have converted to zoned combat. Every one is much more free-flowing, much more narrative, and a much better storytelling in their combat. Which brings me to the second main point. It keeps you from being bogged down with rules. Like, oh my gosh, the amount of rules that games like D&D and Pathfinder have for your movement. It's insane. Like, maybe your game works off of an insane amount of math. Maybe you guys are having an excellent time with that. I do not come to a game for that. I want to have a good time, tell a story, and punch some monsters in the face because it is a fantasy game. But without trying to rant too much on the amount of rules that games have governing spatial concerns in measurements. Really, it keeps you from being so bogged down with rules that you're slowing down gameplay. Because again, then it drags. If you're going to have to break out a calculator to figure out the hypotenuse of an angle, that it slows things down, it drags. It may be fine for the person who's taking their turn, but for everybody else, there are very few situations which that works in. So, it does keep you from being bogged down with all of your rules, with all of the rules, and thereby, again, back to the first point, allows for a much freer narrative to the combat. But regardless of the fact that I genuinely do think it speeds up the combat and makes it more fun for everyone involved, there are some problems with it. There are some problematic aspects in the same way that the original rules as written lend themselves to a very crunchy and slowed down, laggy gameplay. There are some issues with the lack of tactics in zoned combat. For one, AoE spells. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but what effect does this have on areas of effect? Well, there are two rather obvious solutions. One is the zone equals the area, which is simple, but it's a little harsh. If somebody shoots fireball from the forest to the crag, then everything in the crag zone has to roll a dex save. That's harsh. I mean, it could be cool if that's how you want to run your game, but you might want to talk with your players about it first, because that makes a big impact. The other, again, rather obvious solution is what I said earlier: give your players the benefit of the doubt. If they want to fire off that fireball, but they don't want to hit their own comrades, maybe just say, okay, yeah, you can put it here, and it does that. Or just limit the amount of carnage that they don't want to cause. Maybe it's unavoidable. If they want to hit all of the enemies, but the barbarian is directly in the center of those enemies, there's not really a benefit of the doubt. However, he might be the only one that they hit instead of the entire zone. Give your players the benefit of the doubt. And I think that is just the general rule of thumb to govern zoned combat. Give your players the benefit of the doubt. The second one that kind of jumps out to me is higher or lower movement speeds. If someone specifically invests into their movement speed by choosing a race or feat or something else, another subclass or something that adds on 5 feet of movement, and maybe they eventually have like an extra 15 feet of movement from magic items and all these different things. What happens there? Does their investment in that become meaningless? And what about small characters or tiny characters, depending on what homebrew things you allow? What about their movement speeds? Do they still get to move the amount that a regular person with a 30-foot movement speed would use? Or would travel? Do they still get to move that amount? What happens with movement speed? Again, there are two rather obvious solutions. The one is to standardize everything. Doesn't matter your size, doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your features and abilities. You can move to the next zone from the river to the crag with one movement, and you have to dash to get from the forest to the crag. Again, it can be harsh. It's kind of like using the zone for the area of the effect. It can be rather harsh. And for this one, people might feel like some of the traits that they've invested in are a little bit useless. If somebody has spent some time and resources investing into their movement speed, they might feel slighted by the fact that they now don't get any benefit from it. Or you might be giving a major buff to a tiny creature whose movement speed is 15 feet. Regardless, I don't recommend just the standardizing of everything. What I would say is work out something where maybe someone who has invested into their movement speed can move to 2 zones instead of just the one. Maybe they can move to the zone, but they can't get anywhere in the zone. Or maybe they can. It kind of depends on you as the game master and generally the way that your table runs. Or maybe if it's a tiny creature, then they have to dash to move from one zone to the next instead of just using a single movement. But regardless, this one really is more kind of a whatever works for your table. It's, to me, because of the way that zones work, this is much less important than something like an area of effect. But it might be important to some of your players. And that's really the thing. So if you're thinking about doing zone combat, and I highly recommend, if you are thinking about it, take these things into account and figure out how your table plays, figure out what things might be an issue for that, and think through the solutions. And again, I will say it, it has become the refrain of this video, I think. Give your players the benefit of the doubt. Well, that's it, guys. That is zoned combat. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is it useful? Is it not? What are some other problems that you might see arising from this style of combat? For me, it has really changed the game and fixed combat for me in my tables. But it's not the only thing that I do to spice up my combat. I've also learned to use the environment to make interesting encounters. So if you're interested in learning a little bit about that, stay tuned for this video. I think it should be showing up here. Where I talk about exactly that, using the environment, using terrain, and using generally whatever is on the battlefield to make more interesting, more engaging encounters and awesome moments for your players. That's all I've got for right now, guys. Until next time, gotta roll.